What's going on, guys? It's Cimoooooooo. So today I'm bringing to you my top 5 rogue decks of the February 2019 format. Now, I know I just brought to you guys my top 5 meta decks as well as my top 5 competitive budget decks, but this is probably one of the best formats if you're a rogue player, because what? YCS Chicago had 13 different decks make the top 32, most of them pretty much taking up like the last third of the pie chart, and there's so much different diversity in this format that there's a lot of potential for deck building, innovation, and creativity that this is a rogue player's wet dream, and that's why I wanted to go ahead and bring you guys this video. But before we get into it, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you guys don't miss a single upload. And if you really love the content that I produce on this channel, consider supporting me on Patreon or becoming a YouTube channel member, because it's thanks to people like Crazy J that I'm able to bring you this content on a daily basis. So if you're interested, hit the join button down below or check out the links in the description. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. Kicking things off with number 5, we have a deck that actually knocked me out of YCS Chicago, and that deck is Cyber Dragon. Cyber Dragon is kind of like the quintessential rogue deck because, you know, it's always been really good at going second, and it just has all these really good combative tools for a lot of specific meta games. But Cyber Dragon is really good at that. I mean, the fact that it has so much OTK potential going second, but even if the deck goes first, you not only have built-in options, you know, like your Infinity or having multiple negates in addition to that, but you've also got stuff like being able to side into stuff like Goes in Match since the deck is primarily comprised of light monsters. You've got stuff like Inspector Border, which also happens to be a machine, so that's kind of nice. You've got some really interesting options to play around with in your side deck, especially when you go into games 2 and 3. And one of the strongest aspects about Cyber Dragon, especially as a rogue player, no one is going to anticipate they're going to play a Cyber Dragon player going into these main events. Like, yeah, even when Cyber Dragon was super hyped back when Cybernetic Horizon came out, and it was a very, very, like, highly contested deck in terms of what people might play against, you know, it's still a deck that people aren't really anticipating that they're going to go up against, and when they do, it honestly might be their demise in that tournament. Cyber Dragon is just so good in this regard. It does a lot of really cool things. It can just do so much damage, and honestly, some decks are ill-equipped to deal with the amount of damage that Cyber Dragon can output. Now, moving on to number 4, I went ahead with Guru Control. Now, I know I included this on my top 5 budget decks, and honestly, I didn't realize the price of Hidden City had jumped that much. I knew it went up, but it was a little bit on the higher end of my price range for a competitive budget deck. But when we're talking about rogue decks, we're not really focusing on budget here. We're just talking about decks that people aren't necessarily prepared for that can really take the metagame by storm, and Guru Control is one of these decks. This is arguably one of the strongest control decks we're going to have in this format, right up there with Sky Striker, but the thing is, this deck actually has a fairly decent Thunder Dragon matchup as well, just because Guru has the ability to flip Colossus and just shut it off entirely, but the amount of control tools that Guru Control has at its disposal, it's just incredible. I mean, Subterror Fiendus is a card that, like, literally negates anything and also helps facilitate your win condition of keeping the Guru flipping back and forth, so that's just an incredible boon to your deck. And you have so many consistency cards to make sure you're always seeing your Subterror Guru. I mean, you've got the Hidden City, you've got Guru itself, you got Terraforming, I mean, you've got stuff like Pot of Extravagance. I mean, there's so much potential that a deck like this has, and yes, all control decks suffer from the same fate of being blown out by a well-timed evenly match, but honestly, this is one of the scariest control decks, and if you don't know what you're doing against it, this deck is going to completely overwhelm you and end your tournament career rather quickly. So definitely deserving of that number 4 slot, and definitely something you're going to want to look out for. But moving on to number 3, we have a deck that's actually made it onto all 3 of these lists that I've done in the past couple days, and that's Guard Dragon Crusadia. And it's really weird to say that, like, Guard Dragon Crusadia can be a budget deck, a rogue deck, as well as a potential meta deck, and I'm not really going to touch too much on it because, yeah, we know it can end on boards of like several negates, and yeah, it can OTK your opponent, but the thing is, this is still a deck that is very unknown, and a lot of people still do not know how to play against it, so if they're not prepared for it, this deck can just utterly take a tournament by storm. And yes, it loses to well-timed hand traps, but honestly, with the field being as diverse as it is, sometimes you might not even have to worry about it. Guard Dragon Crusadia is equipped with so many different powerful tools for so many of the different matchups. I mean, it's able to go into Naturia Beast, you've got Naturia Barkion, you've got all the crazy extra deck monsters that you can just summon due to the Guard Dragon engine, but then you also have this massive OTK potential in part due to the Crusadia engine. Like, the deck is just fantastic, and again, I don't want to spend too much time talking about it, but it had to make it on here. If you're going to any level of high tier tournament in the foreseeable future, learn your Guard Dragon Crusadia cards, learn the matchup, learn where it is weakest, because you're going to be seeing this deck, and if you're not prepared, it is just going to completely and utterly obliterate you. Now, moving on to number 2, we actually have the first place winner of YCS Chicago, Lunalights. Lunalight is like the textbook definition of a rogue deck in this specific context. It was a deck that no one was prepared for except for the people who were playing it just in case they happen to go against the mirror match. It is a deck that not a lot of people are familiar with, so when you're playing against it, you're going to be misplaying because you're not going to know how and when to interrupt the strategy, but it's a deck that's strong enough to just completely overwhelm and basically isolate a specific part of a weak metagame and be able to just take it over. Lunalight has so many good things going for it because a lot of the effects pretty much have their costs built into the fact that they're things that even if they get negated, it's going to be completely irrelevant. You've got the fact that most of these cards actually aren't hard once per turns, meaning they can be highly abused because we see now how important that once per turn clause is in Yu-Gi-Oh! And the fact that the Lunalights are almost like exempt from this entirely is a really good thing, and also not to mention it has the ability to just OTK your opponent going second. And then even if you're going first, oh guess what, you just Azathoth combo them and then they can't use any monster effects anyway. So going first or going second, this Lunalight deck is fantastic, and honestly it's still the embodiment of a rogue pick. Yeah, sure, it has the danger cards, but it's still primarily a Lunalight deck. And the thing you have to realize is this is a deck that even though it's not very popular, I know some of the players are still piloting it in Europe who played it at YCS Chicago. It's a deck that if you can master it, it's going to be something that could take you really far and something that's just going to completely wreck your shit if you're not prepared for it. So before we get on to my number 1 pick, I did have a few honorable mentions. First up is Spiral. Now, even though Spiral didn't make the top 32 of YCS Chicago, it did make day 2, so it was in contention, but if you've actually been paying attention to the regional scene, Spiral's been actually doing rather well. It's made several top 8s. I believe it's almost won a couple regionals here and there, and the Danger Engine is to help contribute to that, but there have been some pure builds that have been seeing some success as well, because Spiral is still an incredibly powerful deck. I mean, Tough Agent combo is amazing, especially in a more controlled deck type of format, and yeah, sure, it may struggle against particular matchups, but the combos are still there, and if you let a double Helix resolve, that could just spell game over. Not to mention Spiral Sleeper is honestly one of the strongest cards ever printed in this game, so if you let that resolve and have no way to out it, that could just be GG right there. I also wanted to go ahead and give a shout out to Burning Abyss, because again, Burning Abyss has been in contention for top 32 as well. It's also been doing all right on the regional scene. I think Burning Abyss is going to need a little bit more time to kind of figure out how the meta's doing and also regain its identity in terms of what it wants to be accomplishing, but I would never count this deck out, and I wouldn't be surprised if you see this at the top tables of one of your regionals. And then lastly, I want to give a quick shout out to Tru Draco, because Draco is another very solid rogue strategy, and with Monarch Stormforth going to 3, you now have a very solid piece of removal that was before just not really usable at 1. So having 3 copies of this in tandem with all your different floodgates and all the crazy advantage engines that this deck has, you're going to be seeing a lot of success. But that is going to bring us on to my number 1 rogue deck of the February 2019 format. And if you haven't already figured it out, I went ahead with Danger Orcas. Now, this is otherwise known as Attack Deck, piloted by Deception as well as Avery Foster and a few other people at YCS Chicago. Now, this deck has a lot of parallels to the Lunalight deck, the Lunalight deck having a built-in archetype win condition, but the Danger Orcas deck revolves around Borrelsword Dragon, which may not be in archetype, but honestly is like an automatic win condition for any deck that includes it anyway, but this deck specifically focuses on turboing it out. And what I think is really neat about this deck is that this deck is very good at identifying a specific board state that your opponent presents in front of you, and then slowly picking it apart, because this deck can just summon tons of monsters with the danger component, with the Destrudo engine going into stuff like Yazi and Mermere. You've got all the Dark Warrior synergies, and all of these cards happen to be dark, so then you have all the dark support like Allure of Darkness and things like that. And then ultimately, once you pick your opponent's board apart with stuff like the Nightmares or anything else you can tutor in your extra deck, you're gonna just assemble a Borrelsword Dragon and kill your opponent. Even with Danger Thunder Dragon being the strongest deck of this format, this deck can actually very easily pick apart boards like that and play through multiple sets of negation. That's what makes this deck so terrifying, and honestly, that's why I had to put it at number 1. Now, again, because this is a list of rogue decks, this might not be something you see too often, but if someone is motivated enough to learn this deck well enough and play it proficiently, this could be a complete and utter nightmare, no pun intended. Now, just like all the other decks on here, you need to be prepared for this, otherwise this deck is going to completely and utterly rail you, but that's why I had to put it at number 1, because it is definitely terrifying, and Borrelsword might be the last thing you see ending your tournament career. But guys, those are just my thoughts. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think about your top rogue decks for the February 2019 format. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. So guys, thank you so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always, subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content, and if you found this video helpful, consider supporting me on Patreon or becoming a YouTube channel member, because just by showing your support in any way that you can, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.